Hello, my name is Jim Heel. I'm the head of sixth form here at Wellington College, and I first encountered Harkness about 5 years ago when visiting a school in the US by the name of Phillips Exeter Academy. They've been doing Harkness there since the 1920s, and I was incredibly surprised to see the impact that it was having on the students and their learning experience. The first real-time experience I had of it was walking into a classroom of mathematicians, 16-year-olds, and we were actually mildly late for the observation lesson. To my amazement, we walked in to find that not only had the students started the lesson, but they were actually posing one another equations to solve on the board. This kind of independent learning was appealing to me, and it really struck me just how much autonomy was being expressed by the students as a result of the Harkness experience that they had been exposed to. So, having had that experience at Phillips Exeter, it was evident to us here at Wellington that this was a pedagogy that we wanted to get on board with. I came back wanting to spend more time out there to better understand the way that Harkness operated, and I've been lucky enough over the last 3 years to spend my summers working at Phillips Exeter, where I've both been learning how to use Harkness to improve my teaching, but also conducting research into the efficacy of Harkness by way of fostering independent learning and academic curiosity. So what is Harkness? One of the first decisions we had to make here at Wellington was to define it for us, and I think one of the things to be wary of is that this is not a significant or specific set of rules by which you should abide. More than anything, it's a set of tools that can help you in the classroom. Plainly put, Harkness dispels the notion that it is the teacher who is the one at the front of the classroom in possession of all the knowledge and driving all of the learning. What happens around a Harkness table is that students are the ones who drive the learning. Their voice is respected, and their knowledge is acknowledged around the table and within the classroom. A Harkness lesson will often look as though the teacher is making minimal involvements and interjections. Very often students are adding to one another's points, developing ideas themselves, and the process is one of a collaborative exploration into a new idea or set of ideas. The teacher simply acts as facilitator, the idea being that they establish the culture and the environment where students feel comfortable to contribute in that way, that they feel well armed with the knowledge and expertise to be able to do so, and crucially that teachers step back and allow the lesson to breathe and allow the students to express themselves in a meaningful and collaborative way.
What I like about Harkness discussions is the fact that you can bounce ideas off everyone and it's a whole conversation and everyone gets involved.
Yeah, I think the fact that often the teacher isn't as involved. I mean, Mr. Amy will contribute ideas, and if we're sort of struggling, he will give us an idea to bounce off, but then everyone can react. And
I like the way he sits out of it as well. It gives
Yeah.
us kind of more independence to kind of talk about what we want to take.
Exactly, we challenge each other loads. I mean, I like the fact that someone will say an idea, you then either develop on that idea, you kind of keep going, someone else will bring a quote in about that, but then also it'll be challenged.
Yeah.
So
someone can contradict you.
Yeah.
I think because of the intense interaction between pupils and not just a teacher lecturing, the amount of information that can be retained over a short period of time is greatly increased.
Yeah, and also it's very interactive. I mean, you're kind of constantly talking, constantly taking notes. There's no sort of real pause, and it's very intense. But personally, I think that's quite a good thing because we're constantly talking, we're constantly challenging each other, and the ideas you kind of get into a flow of it. Really, it's sort of
you keep going. You kind of, once you start, it's a bit hard to start doing. Like your first Harkness session was like, I remember our first session was shocking. But as soon, like now we get more comfortable with them. Like the idea that you can actually say what you want to say, and it doesn't matter if it's wrong effectively, because someone else will pick it up and maybe go with you or like,
challenge it.
Yeah, and it's all in your own personal opinion.
And also it's really good. I think within Harkness it's essential to make sure everyone's involved. So I mean, you can be like directly question a person and be like, so what do you think about this? And I think that's quite good to
involve
everyone.
Yeah.
And it's especially because it's a round table,
Yeah.
rather than being in rows or in sort of a square or something.
Yeah.
It is a round table, and everyone can see each other.
Yeah, no, it works well.
I think that the reason it's so easy to bounce the ideas back and forth is that, unlike presentations and things like that, there's no pressure on anyone. It's just constantly trying to bringing the best out of your peers by kind of asking the right questions and the right type of prodding for their potential.
Yeah, and you know what you said about there's no presentation. I think that's so good, because all the focus is on the table and on the Harkness table and on us, because we're not watching the screen, we're not focusing on someone else standing up and talking to us. We've got our books, we've got our paper, we've got our pens, and we are focused on the table, on what is happening. I think that's really essential.
So how does this look in practice? Well, one of the best analogies that I've heard from my time in the United States was the metaphor or extended metaphor of walking into a darkened room. The notion being that students encountering a text for the first time, or a biological concept, or a mathematical equation, at first will feel disorientated, not unlike someone stepping into a darkened room. And yet, if you allow them time for their eyes to become adjusted to their surroundings, they may start to see the beginnings of the edge of a table, the frame of a window, and so on and so forth. And the best piece of advice I was given when first learning how to do this is not to turn on the lights, to allow them to explore these ideas themselves, and in so doing, those concepts will stick. The other thing in terms of practical approaches to Harkness that I would stress is that it is not so much about what goes on around the table in the first instance. It's actually about the levels of expectation that you have outside of the classroom. It's born out of many of the principles that underpin the flipped classroom, as exposed by Harvard over the last few years. The idea being that what students do before they arrive at the table is what really matters. So for myself as an English teacher, one way in which I might set up a Harkness lesson is to invite them to explore a poem or a poet, and they arrive to the lesson already armed with all of their thoughts, ideas, reflections upon that poem. I don't set guiding questions, I don't frame their thinking, the idea being that the lesson and the learning will go wherever they want to take it. Upon arriving into the lesson, the expectation is that they are utterly ready and prepared to contribute and collaborate. I will lead the lesson where it needs to go if I feel that it is moving off of the tracks, but the hope is that they will provide one another with the tools that they need in order to do that. Another example from the world of science might be the notion of doing a chemistry experiment, and rather than the teacher being the one who lays out all of the apparatus that is required for the experiment, the teacher might lay out the apparatus that is required and then additional apparatus, and invite the group to have a discussion around which pieces of apparatus are the ones that would be best suited to the experiment they're about to conduct. The idea being that you are capturing the imaginative process of learning rather than simply being dictatorial. It's definitely dialogic in its founding, although I wouldn't say that it is Socratic, because you aren't asking guiding questions yourself. The classic case of the teacher who asks the question that prompts the student to guess what is in the teacher's head is definitely not something that exists here. In many cases, you have to have a poker face with regards to not giving away what you consider the right direction of the learning to go, and trust in the fact that as a group they will get there in the end. In terms of etiquette around the table, one of the things that I often say to students who are encountering Harkness for the first time is that this is as much a listening pedagogy as it is a speaking one. It's absolutely crucial that both teacher and student respect every voice around the table and listen thoughtfully and sympathetically to what's being said. Once you've listened and absorbed what's being said around you, I often provide 3 trigger words, particularly to Harkness novices, and these are add, link, and challenge. Often this helps to underpin their thinking, the idea being that every time you make a comment, it needs to either add to something that has been said before, link to something new, or in some way to challenge the idea that has been presented. This keeps the unity of the Harkness discussion together and prevents students from making unilateral statements as opposed to an actual dialogic example of learning. Many people I've spoken to about Harkness often ask me about what happens to the quieter students. In fact, I would suggest that the main issue that can lead to the derailing of a Harkness discussion is quite the opposite. Those that are known as Harkness warriors, or those that speak too often and too loudly. There is a way of managing both types of students, and that comes down to one-to-one relationships and having discussions around what it means for that person to either speak too much or not speak enough. I've found it incredibly powerful as far as bringing the more shy and reserved students out of their shell, structuring a situation whereby you might challenge them at the next discussion to maybe just make 2 points or raise 2 questions, and then 3 and then 4 is a fantastic way to invest students within the class. And the table itself is a representation of the democratizing of the learning, and very often that actually brings students out of their timid ways rather than keeping them within. As I mentioned, Harkness warriors, it's another kettle of fish. They simply need to be reminded politely that this is a listening way of learning, not so much a speaking one. And more often than not, I've found that students take that sentiment in the right way as intended. We're really proud of what we've done with Harkness here at Wellington to date, but we realise that we're not quite there yet. It's happening in interesting pockets around the school, and although I don't think it will necessarily become a feature of every lesson with every student and every teacher, I think that it is a resource and a set of approaches to learning that have improved the way that we approach teaching and learning, and will continue to over time. Looking ahead, we are interested in taking the research further. We are looking into pathways of research grants that relate to looking at independent learning. As I mentioned, I've already worked with Phillips Exeter in doing some provisional research in this regard, and we look to broaden that and to really look at the extent to which something like Harkness can make a difference in a range of different educational environments, and that's something we're really excited about doing looking forward.